Hello everyone, I'm Sempara Mahmoudou, host of Digitalk, a flagship initiative of Morocco World News, where we call different experts from different domains all across the continent, the African continent, to come talk about the digitalization process in Africa. Digitalization in agriculture, digitalization in different domains, artificial intelligence, machine learning, to come tell not only their experience, their journey, but also to share knowledge to our esteemed audience. So today we are in Marrakech at GITEX Africa, the Africa biggest tech event on the continent, unfolding on 3 days from today, which is Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, where giants of the tech domain come together for 3 days to explore, to network, and to talk about technology. And today for our Digitalk, the first session of this flagship initiative from Morocco World News, I'm hosting Salma Kabbaj, who is CEO and co-founder of Impact Lab. So to come back briefly on Asma, and Impact Lab today is a leading innovation accelerator in Africa with more than 300 startups supported across 23 countries all over Africa. And today our discussions will explore how African can forge a new development path, not remixing what have been done in other continents. And good morning, Salma.
Good morning. Very happy to be here with you.
Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Can you tell us a bit more about your career, your journey, before we get into the deep of our discussion today?
Well, I'm very happy to be talking about this topic because it's exactly the reason why we created Impact Lab. Impact Lab came from the idea that we needed to change the way we build businesses in order to be more relevant to the problems of Africa. And we want to capitalize on innovation and on African innovators to create new business models that are going to solve Africa's challenges. So this is a great topic for me. I come from a background of strategy consulting and finance. I had almost 15 years work experience in those fields before I decided to launch Impact Lab in 2015. And at Impact Lab, we empower founders, startup founders in Africa to help them grow and accelerate their ventures through incubation, acceleration programs, through financing and connections to the key partners of the ecosystem in Africa. But we also work with corporates and public institutions to help them become more innovative themselves, because we can foster the development of innovative solutions, but if there are no clients to buy those solutions and to scale them, then there's no point.
Exactly.
So we have to work on all stakeholders and make sure we create those bridges between the people that are developing innovations and the people who have the ability to scale that innovation to make sure we're really disrupting models.
So it is a collective action, a collective endeavor. You mentioned something that's one of Africa paradox is that we have, let's say, huge amount of resources in every domain. I'm talking about human capital. I'm talking about natural resources. I'm talking about, how can I say that? In every domain, let's say we are blessed. But weirdly enough, we are also one of the continent, the less developed one. And most of the time when we approach the question of development, particularly on the continent, we tend to think of the how can I say, the traditional way of development. I'm talking about industrialization, like we saw it in Europe. But what are, like, and obviously these approaches that have been implemented in Europe, North America, or Asia have consequences, have limitations. We're seeing with climate change, and I wanted to ask you, with that, from your experience, from your journey, what are the limitations of this approach that worked elsewhere into the African context?
Yeah. Well, so there are different types of limitations. First, we see limitations even in the way these development models are being implemented in Europe and North America. We see how they created societies that are very, let's say, fragmented and with a lot of disparity. So socially, it's creating problems. We see the problems on the environment and climate change that is making this model unsustainable in the future, in the very near future.
And in the present.
Yeah. And we also see how culturally, I mean, beyond the notion of wealth, the problem of wealth disparity, there's also impacts on how societies are interacting. A lot of loneliness, a lot of anxiety,
mental health
illness,
problems.
Exactly. So these models, even in their own environments, are showing their limits. On the other hand, also, these models are not in any case adapted to the needs of the continent. They were not developed to meet the realities of the continent in terms of cost, in terms of user experience, in terms of resources required to deploy them. And so I think today when I talk to corporates, for example, you mentioned agri-tech earlier. When I talk to corporates in the agriculture field, they tell me, well, we interacted with startups from Europe and from North America, but the solutions don't match our needs. It's not the same cultures, it's not the same data,
Some realities.
it's not the same soil, and even the users are different.
Yes.
You cannot compare a farmer or a farm operator in Africa with a farmer in Europe or in the US. And so I think we need to see this as a major opportunity for Africa to actually capitalize on these gaps that exist today, to create our own technology and become less dependent on imported technology that is actually not even efficient for us.
And even imported solutions. Exactly. Excellent point. Because now we're in Africa, what we're hearing most about is African solutions to African problems. And this is something that especially youth are advocating across the continent. Based on what you've just said, that those models that we are trying to duplicate didn't work and didn't even match where they have been implemented. In Africa, we're not even talking about it. How can Africa leverage its strength, its unique strength? Because today we are the youngest continent in the world. We are the continent of resources. We possess. Talking about agriculture, we possess 60% of arable land. So this is a unique strength that African nations have. How can we leverage this unique strength and resources to forge a new development paradigm driven by innovation, by local solutions, by sustainable solutions?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and I think you're right to emphasize the assets that the African continent holds, and that's making us really the one continent with the highest perspective of growth. There's still huge untapped opportunity in terms of, you were talking about arable land, but also, for example, productivity improvement, and we have the talent to do that. And also one element that's very important is that in a lot of countries, not all of them, but we don't have very rigid systems that are already in place. a very rigid regulation that is already in place. And also, like, this is, I'm talking generally, but this is very different from one country
to another, because we're talking about 54 countries when talking about Africa.
So this last point is less true maybe for Francophone Africa, but still, you know, for example, the fact that the banking system was not as mature as the banking system in Europe or in the US allowed for the development of mobile banking in Africa to an extent that was much earlier and much faster than in other geographies. And Kenya, for example, is a great example, is a great model for the development of that mobile banking. And mobile banking is very important, not to make life easier like maybe it's used in Europe, but for Africa, it is a financial inclusion mechanism, because all of a sudden it allowed people that were completely disconnected from the traditional financial sector to integrate that sector without creating a bank account, without all the administrative process. Even if they had little revenues, all of a sudden through mobile banking they were able to get scoring with their transactions. All of a sudden they were able to access small loans to grow their businesses. Maybe it's an informal business, but that's okay, it's a reality of Africa.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden they had access to micro-insurance products. That is very important for the livelihood of population. So an example like this of how, you know, the fact that the systems were not already so rigid, regulation was not already so rigid, gave the right set of environment for African talent to push a new way of doing that had major social consequences for the population.
In some way to go above the boundaries, and not only to go above the boundaries, but like you say, the less rigidity of the framework, legal framework, institutional framework, can give us opportunity to disrupt a system that is not well established yet. And which is a very interesting point you mentioned about the fintech, like the financial inclusion today in Africa, like you say, the mobile banking across, especially coming myself from sub-Saharan Africa. This is, let's say, a tool that is helping people who has never thought of having a bank account to secure their finances and to have access to it. But what is also interesting about technology is that it got limitation. So here, my question is, what are the key challenges to overcome in achieving widespread digital inclusion in the African context?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, technology is amazing because it allows to disseminate expertise, knowledge, services, high quality services, and to democratize access to all this. But in order for people to benefit from this, they have to have access. So they have to have the hardware, the phones, and not any phones. They have to be phones that are capable of
smart.
Yeah,
smartphone.
Smart. They have to have battery life. They have to have
sometimes internet access.
And yeah, exactly. And beyond the hardware, they need the internet connection. And this is a key topic because internet connection is still it still doesn't cover all areas, but most of all, it's still very expensive in a lot of countries. So this is something that we have to work on, and we have to work, and this is happening slowly but surely, but the solutions themselves, the solutions that are packaged by the startups with the hardware, with the software, are still expensive. So if we're talking about agri-tech, for example, what is it? I think the number is something like 70 or 80% of agriculture in Africa is done by smallholder farmers with maybe less than 5 hectares or something like that. When you look at that and you see the solutions that are being developed, that are amazing to better manage, for example, water resources, to make better decisions in the farm. Well, they require investment. You have to put in the captures. You have to have the software to analyze the data. You have to pay for the cloud services, etc., etc. And today, the smallholder farmer in Africa is still not able to access all these amazing technologies. So there need to be some mechanisms in place to make sure that maybe through intermediaries, through structured cooperatives, or through bigger agricultural players that are willing to cover the cost of the technology on behalf of the smallholder farmer, we can disseminate. But we have to think again and be innovative, think outside the box, be innovative, and find the solutions not only to produce the technology, but also to make sure that that technology is accessible.
Exactly, and that's a good point. That will lead me to my next point. We talk about how, let's say, some of the traditional developmental paradigm are not doesn't suit African case, and sometimes doesn't even suit their own cases. I'm talking about Western societies here, and the approach that have been done in most of these countries is a top-down approach to development. And you just talked about the importance of smallholder farmers. Sometimes they are the biggest, when it comes to agricultural field, and which logically and normally enough make them, let's say, if I might say, the fuel of African development. And I think also that we might consider them. So how can we prioritize community-driven solutions and empower local actors to shape their own development trajectories?
Yeah, I think it's very important, and for me it is the heart of what a startup does. To me, one of the main qualities of a startup, yes, it's the agility, but it's the agility based on a real deep understanding of the community they're serving and the market they're serving. And you can only do that if you are on the field, and if you're talking to these communities, and if you're immersing yourself in these communities. And that's the real strength of a startup, and that's I'm going to say, the prerequisite for the success of a startup. A startup cannot succeed unless it really, really understands really well the problem that it is addressing, the people that are suffering from this problem, and the needs of these people and their realities. And so I think what our institutions need to understand, and even the corporates need to understand, is that they don't have that flexibility, that agility, and they don't have that grassroots understanding of the market reality. So they need to capitalize on the startups, and they need to use startups as really their tool to create locally adapted solutions. And our institutions and our corporates in Africa really have to understand that. I'm going to talk about fintech, for example. I've seen examples in Morocco of banks trying to launch a mobile payment platform, but they're doing it from their offices.
The 19th stairs, having a beautiful view, taking some coffee, and writing some.
And they're developing that among themselves.
Yeah.
But who are the people who are going to use this?
Exactly.
And in the end, what they're developing is not used because it did not involve the actual people, the taxi driver, the person offering services on the street or home services. These are the people who are going to be using the solution.
Who are concerned.
Yeah. And so that institution if it had relied on an innovator, on a startup founder to build that solution, it would have been a solution that would have been adapted to that reality. And this is where paradigms need to change also. We have to stop, our institutions in Africa have to stop looking for international expertise and rely more on the innovation talent in Africa to be in line with the market needs and the market evolution, because things are changing very fast also.
So if there is something to emphasize here, is that we have to be aware that there can be a gap between the problems and the solution that is proposed when the approach is top-down.
Yeah.
So to more rely on a bottom-up approach in order to respond efficiently to the problems posed. Now we say solutions. You mentioned the role of entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs. You mentioned the role of a local community and even policymakers, different organizations. But when we look at Western states, most of their, let's say, developmental approach has came with the price of climates, price of environmental issue. And how can we, African, the solutions you've just advocated, how can we ensure that all these solutions, all these aspiration of development path prioritize sustainability and environmental protection, and what are the opportunities, generally speaking, for green technology and climate smart solution to drive this economic growth and at the same time resilience?
Yeah, well, I think we have one advantage, is that we see what's happening, and we see that the way traditional businesses conduct their business is not sustainable and will be damaging for the business itself. And I think today it's becoming something that even larger corporations are aware of to some extent, especially on some sectors. When I look at Morocco, for example, we have been going through one of the worst drought in Moroccan history for the past 5 or 6 years now, and we cannot deny that anymore. It's our day to day. It's fields that are being abandoned because there's no more water to actually cultivate them. It's restrictions on water in the cities that some cities have experienced, which is something that we could have never imagined happening. So climate change, I think, we're feeling it in Africa to a much stronger extent maybe than
other part of the world.
And today, I mean, in Impact Lab, we see that most entrepreneurs that come to us are entrepreneurs that are driven not only by profitability, but also because they want to make a difference. And this is a key difference between the profiles of entrepreneurs that we see in Africa and in other regions. The African entrepreneurs, they have that fire in them. They want to solve problems. They're not here because they want to, create a fancy technology, a nice avatar that will, tell people on the train stations where to go have coffee. They're here because
real
they saw
challenges.
a family member die because they didn't have access to blood. They saw someone around them not being able to, or go through bankruptcy, or because they were not able to manage their farm in a climate change context. So these are driven by these problems. And in terms of environment, I think today technology offers a unique opportunity to actually solve these challenges that we're facing. We have the capacity to use data to improve the way we are using water, for example. We have technology that that allows to cultivate differently with a more respectful environment approach, using less pesticide. We also have startups coming up with organic
optimizing land.
Exactly. And
Interesting.
It's and in the clean tech field as well, we see many examples of startups that are proposing solutions to better manage the use of energy in different fields, better track the way energy is used, make sure it's not wasted. And so today there are many innovations around this, and I think that I really believe in the responsibility of larger institutions to push those innovations.
Great. You said something interesting, or you emphasized on a point where what differentiates an African entrepreneur to other parts of the world. Here we want to address real challenges that sometimes they themselves faced or some member of a family faced. And also this just reminds me of when it comes to development in general. When we say development, in general speaking, we directly think of GDP, numbers, how many millions, how many billions, how many profit. We're more about GDP, we're more about, let's say, the traditional way of doing things have always solely focused on economic growth.
Yeah.
How we, in African perspective, how can we develop a more holistic approach, a more resilient approach to progress, one that prioritizes social inclusion, human development, environmental awareness, well-being also, one that go beyond GDP.
Yeah. I think this is a very important point, and I think unfortunately we're still in a model where in Africa we rely on international funding, and international funding comes also with constraints of using international models.
Exactly.
So when you borrow money from the World Bank, well, they have their own indicators that they need
that
to
you have to
track,
follow,
and you have to follow them. And we still have that dependence that's not really allowing us to go completely
out of the box,
out of the
disruptively.
box, exactly on this topic. But it's a very important topic. I mean, we see today in the corporate world more and more talk about, adding in their reporting more data around the inclusion, around their environmental impact. I would say it's a good step forward. Today's a lot of talk, it's a lot of packaging, but I guess there's soon, I don't see how leaders can believe that they can still operate and still grow and still be competitive without thinking about inclusion and without thinking about environment. There's a wall that's very close to us, and the companies that have not understood that will hit that wall in a very
very bad way, I must say. Thank you very much, dear Salma Kabbaj, for this insight.